trying maybe to explore them, to sort of, to put them, to articulate them maybe, that at least to change yourself, and it's damn difficult thing to change yourself. And you're sort of facing reality in different forms. For example, during the social media, for example, you are discovering racial issues and so on and so on. They're coming one by one, discovering and discussing them. So all the angst and rock of histories are coming from inside rather than from outside.
And that's something that comes across beautifully in your work, and that you, I think it's so clever, The Devil's Dance, because we have these two timelines, much as Shabnam does, and I think you do this as well, actually, Shabnam, in your book. The two timelines start to speak to each other and start to interact. They're almost like chemical elements that are kind of changed by the proximity, and we see the storylines starting to bleed together in funny ways, and characters acting in parallel ways. Very powerful, and makes that point that you've said very clearly that human nature is essentially constant, and so even though a world might feel quite remote, the forces that drive us can often be very recognisable. So Rhett, your novel The Lighthouse Family, which I really enjoyed reading, focuses on, it begins with a family who were displaced, or rather they chose to leave because the Greek community where they were living had been displaced as part of the turmoil around the end of the Ottoman Empire, and they also had left because the community had been destroyed, and they live now across the water, looking back at this land where part of the family came from, and the pain of those upheavals and the legacy of that plays a massive role in the book. What brought you to write about that issue? Why is writing about these very painful, difficult issues so central to your work?
Well, authors are the mirror of societies. We always deal with problems, social injustices, historical injustices. We can't be ignorant, and it's also related to our background. In The Lighthouse Family, as you mentioned, there are more about migration, war. My backgrounds are also, I'm a migrant. We migrated from Greece to Turkey, and I grew up listening to sad stories from my grandfather, grandmother, and when they were telling, they cried because they were happy in Turkey. They were Turk and living in their country, but they could never forget their homeland. And of course, I was influenced from this background, and the tracks of being a migrant you can see in my own works, in other books as well, because it is a feeling of being uprooted when you leave your home country and go to any place. You miss those places. You miss the place where you were born, and this is tragic. So, and that's why I touch upon this topic. And war is also important in the Lighthouse Family. This is Second World War. We see how the war influenced the life of people, even when it's not their war, because Turkey was not a part of the war. But we see how their life changes in the course of time after war. I try to be objective in my book, because during the population exchange after the World War I and Turkish Independence War, the Greeks minority living in Anatolia, they had to go to Greece, and the Turkish minority living in Greece migrated to Turkey. And both population, both people suffered because they left. I listened to stories of Turks who left their houses, including my grandparents from Greece. But I listened to the stories of Greek people as well. They also missed their country. So that was inevitable for me not to write.
Yeah, I'm going to take issue with your word objective because I don't think you are objective. I think what you are is deeply subjective, but subjective in the round, in that you get into the feeling on all sides. And I think this is something you all excel at as writers, being able to feel on all sides of the question and show us the humanity there. And so you present a rounded picture, but I don't think it's objective. I think you present a full picture, and that's what's so compelling. But to me, objective suggests very cold and critical and detached. And I don't think you are at all. I think you're very involved with your characters. Would you agree with that?
Yes, objective maybe is not the right expression, but I would say impartial maybe. Because I am a diplomat, I'm representing, but I didn't focus on my own people. So that's why I mean it objective. I just want to make the real picture, give the real picture, and talk about the suffering of everybody.
Now, you mentioned that migration plays a part in your story. In fact, it plays a part in all of your stories. Shabnam, your family moved to India, I think it was your grandparents' generation, is that right? Moving to South Africa. It's your grandparents' generation in the 1930s. And Hamid, you had to leave Uzbekistan in 1992 because of your political views being outlawed or books being banned. I wanted, with all three of you, having that experience of an insight into another place or another culture, another view, how that shapes your writing. Does that give you something extra, that a different perspective that maybe someone who only knows one culture or knows one community or is very rooted in a central community, the mainstream community of the place, might not have? What do you think?
I think it gives you a sense of in-betweenness, which I think is important in writing. So, you know, in South Africa, I belong to an Indian community, but I'm also South African. But there is that you sort of find yourself in a little, I think especially when I was younger, like now I'm older and I kind of understand where I belong and who I am. But when you're younger, you grow up being taught, and especially by a family, if like I lived with my grandfather who came from India, especially if they're immigrants in your house, they're very afraid that you're going to lose your culture and you're going to lose your language and your ways. So it's a lot about holding on. But then I come from a South Africa where we're welcoming a post-apartheid world where you have to embrace being South Africa, you're embracing your diversity, and yet you have in your family people telling you, no, you're Indian, you know, and that also came from the idea of when we moved to South Africa, we were segregated, and so this idea of we have to, my grandfather or my father would be like, you have to stay segregated, you know, and yet I come from a new generation. So I think being from two cultures gives you that sense of, that struggle of that conflict of who you are and where you belong, but which is a great tool in writing to be able to understand that sense of identity. But it also, I had a good second point, but I got lost in the first point. But it also, being part of two cultures also gives you a, I just think it's excellent for being a writer and giving you a sense of where you are. Yeah.
If the other point comes back,
I will
say. Hamid, what about you? Having that, being out Uzbekistan for more than 30 years now, as you said yesterday, what was going to be a 3-month stay in France turned into 30 years and away from your country, although you maintain close contact with the country, you have a lot of insight into life there, you read a lot of what's published there and you write about it. But how that distance, what does that give you as a writer? Or what does it take away, perhaps, as well?
With all due respect to sort of nationalities, ethnicities, you know, we are sometimes overplaying these social constructs, you know. I did my DNA analysis. And I've got everything in my blood, you know, starting from Moore and ending with Joyce. So I'm relative to all of them, yes, relative to all of them. It's not because my forefathers or foremothers were too promiscuous or whatever. It's just the state of the matters, you know. Wars, migrations, all of that is sort of serving, you know, to become a mixture of many things. Yes, we do belong to our languages, for example, we work for these languages, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, I do agree that it gives you different perspectives, you know. You are not sticking to one side. For example, I wrote a novel, Gaia, or Queen of the Ants. Main character of it is a Turk Meskhetian who was kicked out of Uzbekistan because my nation sort of, you know, started ethnically cleansing, you know, from brotherly Turks, yeah. Ideologically, everyone is saying we are brothers, we are brothers, we are brothers. But there were ethnic clashes when normal people, or seemingly normal people, turned overnight into the beasts. So obviously, you know, you have to take that, for example, you know, responsibility for that one as well, as one part of this particular ethnicity or whatever. How to do it? Maybe that is the way, you know, to put yourself into the shoes of the other side, for example. So that gives you the perspective, especially when you are sort of, you know, partly becoming an English, British, let's say, partly becoming Czech, partly becoming French or whatever. It gives you different perspectives.
I mean, Virat, your work as a diplomat, you also, in addition to having migration as part of your family story, you've travelled and lived all over the world and lived for a long time in a number of different places. What does that give you, that overview? Does it contribute to your writing and your ability to see different sides of the questions that you explore?
Yes, I have double identity, as you mentioned, and it has, of course, negative sides and positive sides, but being a diplomat contributes me as being an author and a writer as well, because, you know, I mentioned you my background. My predecessor, my grandfather, they come from Greece, and mother side from Bulgaria. And then when I was 5, we migrated from Turkey to Germany, so I was raised in German culture as well. And additionally, I become a diplomat every 4 years. You know, I am a real migrant, a modern migrant now. But they all contribute to your imagination and to your inspiration. As a diplomat, we spend most of our lives abroad, knowing new culture, exploring new colors, climates, making new friends, and they are all source of inspiration for us. And the best stories happen when the cultures meet or clashes, and this is our life. We always are with different cultures, and that's why in every post this is another experience. And as a writer, I don't need to chase the stories as a diplomat. The stories find me in my post.
That's nice.
Sorry,
Got your
I didn't remember my point, but to add to that, I'm just realizing as we're speaking, when you're part of many different things, it also lends to writing, because when you're writing, you have to change perspectives, move between characters, have empathy in different ways. And I think if in your own life you're moving so quickly, it just helps in the writing as well to understand very easily from another point of view, because you yourself have done that so often.
Yeah, and something, yes.
Sorry, I would like to also add something. You talking about Meskhetians. For example, you asked what was the advantage of being a diplomat. And then I said, in different cultures, you explore new cultures. My first book, for example, I wrote when I was in Georgia as deputy ambassador. So this is an example. I met old people, 80, 85 and more. They were sent to exiles during Stalin time in 1944 to Central Asia. I listened to their stories, recording whatever they said. I went to visit their abandoned villages. And then, one morning I just woke up and said, I have to write a novel. So I was deputy ambassador then. And this is an example, for example. And I was ambassador before India to Eritrea, Asmara. I spent 3 years there. And then I met so many people and old, veterans, independence fighters. And I listened to their stories. That was really, their stories impressed me so much. And then one morning I woke up and then I started writing my new novel, The Ring. So the influence is always there.
Sometimes you have to be a little careful about what you bring out when, don't you? Because of the sensitivities of your job, you have to be a little careful of what you think about, what you talk about.
This is true. I have double identity, and as an ambassador, I have my own commitments. I cannot write everything, whatever I want. As a writer, your limit is the limit of your imagination. But as an ambassador, I am representing a state. I cannot write a topic when they potentially harm the relations with my country with third countries. So I have to be very careful. And this is a sort of self-censorship, I would like to say. But this is also not ethical. You represent as a state, and then, of course, you have your limits. It's very normal.
Would you agree, Hamid, that for you the limits of your imagination are your limits, or do you have limits? Are there things that you find yourself or things that you couldn't write about, things that you would feel, or do you find yourself when you're writing that you self-censor in any way?
Generally, one of the blessings, I talked about that one, one of the blessings of the being in exile is your freedom. Freedom to write what you want, in a way. Because there are no pressures. There are no pressures from the government, there are no pressures from your peers, there are no pressures from the fashion, or sort of, the rules of the game, basically. You are free to write whatever you want. But once again, it's, as I'm saying, you are not writing about the outer world so much as about the sort of conjunction of this outer world with your inner yourself. So here, for example, there are limits, maybe limits of your sort of, makeup, basically, of your makeup. Yeah, though you try to be brave and, for me, for example, breaking rules, for example, of the creativity, of, for example, there is the sort of creative writing courses, yeah? I think that creativity dies wherever it's put into the sort of, scheme. So every generation is here to recreate the sort of rules, Once in one of my early poems I said maybe the sort of, meaning of our essence is to create a new chaos out of all the chaos, So that is maybe our sort of, destiny.
A new chaos out of all the chaos. Wow, yeah. I like that. Shabnam, how about you? Do you feel limited at all in your writing?
I mean, I don't like to think I feel limited. I think I feel quite free when I'm writing, often about things that I'm not allowed to talk about in my community. I will say I do feel a little pressure on me to write, to show the nuance and the layers of things. So quite often in my writing, I write about how, you know, I come from a Indian Muslim community, and I wasn't allowed to travel by myself. My family was like, oh, girls are not allowed to travel by myself, and I think it's very easy to just start writing about how this is a patriarchal society, that I was a woman, I was not allowed in my family, and my father was, this is what Muslim people do. But I feel this pressure, not even a pressure, but you know, as a writer, to tell the truth is that there's layers and nuance. And so for me to show that it wasn't like that, in the sense that maybe my father didn't want me to travel by myself, but he went out of his way to take me to these places, so that if I wanted to go and teach in a school in the Himalayas, he took me there and brought me back. And it was more from his perspective that at least I'd be safe, you know. So I think there's these tropes you can fall into, or these stereotypes you can fall into, and then I feel maybe for me the things are to just show you the layers and nuance in societies and communities that they are there. So not restrictions, but these small pressures that come in saying, tell the full story, don't just tell the easy story.
And is that partly fueled by a sense of what the reader might expect, what people might expect you to say, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think if you're telling a story about a girl who wasn't allowed to travel, you think, oh, well, this is what Indian communities are like, or these are what Muslim communities are like. And that's not true. There's always a deeper level to things, and that is your job as a writer to show that what is in your. If you're going to write about your community, you should write everything, you know, and leave it up to the reader to then decide.
Yeah. Did you want to say something, Vera? I wanted to think a bit about metaphor, because you all, and imagery, something you all do beautifully is you really use imagery to work hard to show us things. So, for example, at the start of the Lighthouse family, you set this quite idyllic domestic scene. The main character, remind me of his name. Yes, well, he's coming home from school. Your protagonist. I can't remember his name. Oh, that's why. Oh, good. It's not me. Not me failing there. Not me being a bad reader. Yeah, he's coming home from school with good school results. He's just finished, and it's that idyllic start of the holiday feeling. The family's on its best form, but all is not well. And you show this partly by there are some alarming images that come in. So you liken at one point there's a reference to gunfire or a gun firing, and there are military images and suddenly violent images that disturb this very idyllic picture of this family gathering for dinner. I wondered how you develop that in your writing. Is that something that comes instinctively, or where do the images come in when you're working?
I like using metaphors in my novels. For example, lighthouse itself is a metaphor, because lighthouse is a space, a building that we cannot see in our daily life. It is a symbol of loneliness, because lighthouses are always far away from everything, everywhere. But this is also a light, a hope, a rescue. It is a metaphor because in my novel, a poor family living in the lighthouse, they are lighthouse keepers. And our main protagonist, he completed his primary school, but wants to study further. He doesn't want to be a lighthouse keeper. But as a person who lives in a small family, his manpower is needed. He cannot just go. His brother is sick, and then we see his struggle and how his siblings are helping him to further to do it. And another metaphor is the mastic tree. The family of our protagonists are migrated from Chios Island, from Greece, and the only thing that they can bring is a mastic tree. So this is also a symbol for their lost world.
And they use the tree for wishes, don't they? They plant things.
Oh yes, yes, yes. Shall I tell you about this? Okay, this is also just a part. This is a tradition, but well-known tradition. I think it's also in Uzbekistan. Hıdrellez. You have this? Yeah. So I, of course, reflect the Turkish culture as well, and the cultural changes. So this is the same what you mentioned. We have a special event. It's 7th of May every year. You know, in every culture, there is something when you celebrate the spring or summer. And in Balkans, Middle East, Central Asia, Turkey, we call it Hıdrellez. Hıdrellez means the prophet Hıdır and prophet Ilyas. They are two prophets. They come once a year on earth just to meet. And this is 7th of May. When they come, you can have some wishes, and everybody thinks it can realize, you know, come to true your wishes. And we do it like this. You take something symbolizing your wish. For example, if a woman wants to have a baby, she makes a baby, or if you want to have a house, you know, you make a wooden small house or stone, and then you dig it under the rose bushes, and then wish something. So this is very emotional part, because our protagonist, he had several wishes. He wants to go to city and take part to the exam for Village Institute, but his elder brother is sick, and then he changed his mind, and then he just find a pebble stone and make the face of his brothers and wish my brothers get well, and then just dig it. And then at the end, we have some related parts about the story, but I don't want to give any spoilers.
Absolutely. Hamid, as I mentioned earlier, in the Devil's Dance, the two storylines start to bleed together, and one of the ways you do this is with imagery, the vines. There are vines that Abdullah is working on in the opening chapter, and then vines start to grow, creep into the other story as well. And there are various similes and metaphors that you use that echo each other. Can you talk a little bit about your use of imagery? How do you develop it, and how do you think about it?
Okay, thank you. Like many of us, nowadays I'm very much interested in artificial intelligence, but I was lucky enough, you know, when the French poets invited me for 3 months in 1992. One of them was the founder of generative poetry. So the person who was in sort of avant-garde of making computers write the poetry. For him, poetry was just the text. Nothing to do with your life, with your suffering, with your frailties, with your flaws, and so on and so forth. So basically, your life of a poet means nothing for him. Just the text. So basically, that is the kind of content of my latest novel, which is coming out this summer from Yale University, which is called We Computers. So, you know, once again, metaphors, poetry, dreams are the only things which are sort of, you know, differ us from the artificial intelligence. We gave to artificial intelligence our linear sort of logic, yeah? Linear logic, so it's much better than us. In a way, we are sort of, you know, gave to artificial intelligence our responsibilities as well. And sometimes I call artificial intelligence AI amoral intelligence, yeah? Yes. because we decided to give all our morals to something sort of objective, not judgmental, and so on and so forth. Because we ourselves, we are full of flaws. But our strength is exactly, you know, that side. Intuition, dreams, poetry, all of that, in which artificial intelligence is absolutely useless and hopeless.
Shobnam, in the Jinn waits 100 years, the house itself is really a massive metaphor, isn't it? And at times it's like a body, but you describe it as having flesh, as a heartbeat. Why did you decide to conceive of it in that way, and what does that, tell us about the thinking? And I mean, the imagery in the book also is incredibly powerful, but that particular image is very striking and persists throughout the book.
I think I'm always thinking about human beings in every way, in everything, in non-animate objects. So even in a house, I think a house becomes a nice way of describing a human being, which is that we have all these rooms inside us, and that some rooms are locked that we never allow anyone access to, even ourselves. And that there are some rooms that we make beautiful for other people. There are places that are decaying and rotting and things we hide. And I think a house is just a beautiful metaphor for everything. Like even when I talk about writing this novel, I talk about how the house was like covered in vines and underneath all this grime and this grass, and it took me like 9-10 years with an agent and an editor to cut away all the grass, to open the windows and show this house to everybody. A house is, and my father's an architect also, so maybe this is why a house always just comes to mind, but for me, a house is a place you inhabit with many spaces, and it's an inside space. And sometimes if parts of the windows break, then the outside comes on the inside, and that's when you become afraid because you can't protect the inside, the interior anymore. And just a house is just a beautiful metaphor for everything, for writing books, for life, for living, the way we try to live our lives, we protect ourselves, and we're exposed, and yeah, a house is just the best metaphor for me, and so that's why it became a focal character in the novel. For me, inanimate objects are the best way to show things about life. So in the novel, the smells, there's older smells up in the eaves, and there's younger smells fighting with each other, talking about the past and talking about the present. The house.
Yes, there's a lovely bit where there's some cooking going on in the kitchen, and the older smells gets rather affronted by these.
The older smells are high up in the ceiling,
smells.
and they're like, look at these younger smells. How they're so eager. They should be calm. But so for me, I'm always thinking about inanimate ways and human ways, and so the house also automatically became that.
Yeah, it's beautifully done. Now, all of you, to a certain extent, are writing for readers who may not know the intricacies of some of the stories you're telling. Your stories throughout are very international. They travel all over the place. So although a Turkish reader may know, because you write in Turkish, so your first reader would be a Turkish reader, they may know some elements of the stories. They will not know everything. How do you deal with incorporating the right amount of explanation without it being too bogged down by explanation? How do you balance that? Is that something that you think about a great deal in your work?
Yes, this is a very important point.